Welcome back. You're watching HFO-TV, co-sponsored by AMF Capital, the Ball-Janik Law Firm, and the construction firm J.R. Johnson.
Welcome back to HFO-TV. I'm Greg Frick, partner at HFO Investment Real Estate. And today we have Dr. Gerard Mildner. He's the academic director of the Portland State University School of Real Estate. Back again, we've talked to Dr. Mildner many times over the years about varying issues, so I kind of thought it'd be good to bring him back in, get an update of what's going on in the Portland State School of Real Estate, and then we'll talk a little bit about different aspects of the market here in Oregon and Washington. So again, thank you for coming again. Maybe give an update of what's, there's been a lot of talk about the Portland State School of Real Estate. I know there's some new programs in place. Maybe give an update on that for some of the viewers.
Yeah, we have had a master's degree running now since 2012.
Right.
Each year up until now, we've seen growth in the and I think the program is in very good shape. We have got to the point now where we have four workshop teams. Our workshop is our capstone. It's really the feature to our program. So we've been competing for many years now in the multi-university competition in Seattle that NAIOP offers and send 6 students, 1 team to that. But this summer we had 3 workshop teams all studying development options in the Central East Side.
Right.
And NAIOP very generously helped us organize mentors for each team. They looked at 3 different sites, one owned by the Menashe family at Hawthorne and 6th, one owned by Prosper Portland next to the Convention Center, and one owned by American Assets Real Estate Trust, a super block.
Near the Lloyd Center there.
Near the Lloyd Center.
Right.
And that was interesting to follow because the students had to, on the Menashe site, had to navigate the industrial office regulations that govern much of the Central East Side. So
is this kind of like a school project where the group gets together, looks at a potential development, and does some research within the market as to what could be done there? And
that's right. So the students have to divvy up all the tasks. That includes, understanding how the zoning works, understanding what the market realities are for each of the different product types, making sure they don't build too much that couldn't be absorbed. Understanding what their long-term obligations are, and then finding out what the lending and investment community will accept as far as parameters for the project. So on the 2 northern sites, they looked at housing was an option.
Right. I talked to some of the students about our take on the housing side over there,
and trying to navigate through the inclusionary zoning regulations. And then on the southern site, the Menashe site, that was really office at best, industrial office. They actually did a very good job, I thought, and those are all posted on our website. So if viewers are interested in any of those projects, they can come.
Okay, so you see the website below, and got it. Okay, and then there's I know there's been a new program for management, property management.
That's right. So historically, we've been receiving a lot of job notices for people interested in property, looking for property managers, but it's not really the right position for our master's degree students who are typically looking for something else. Right. And so what we've done is we've worked with the business school and the university as a whole to create 2 programs that are very similar. One's going to be a minor in property management, and the other will be a certificate in property management, targeted either for students who are outside the business school or inside the business school. And they'll have a core suite of 3 courses on residential property management principles in general, and commercial property management, and then they'll add other courses to kind of round out their whole minor and certificate curriculum. So, these students might be probably will be management or finance students if they're in the business school. If they're not, they could be from a variety of majors. And I think for people who are landlords of property, whether it's office or multifamily, I think we will have a stream of students perhaps as soon as June 2020.
So got it. So next year.
Yeah, it'll bleed into next year. We'll probably have a soft rollout this winter. Students, do their education in odd ways. So we might have a few graduates as quickly as June, but a lot more graduates by say March 2021.
Which will be good for just exposure within the industry. I mean, people ask all the time about different avenues within commercial real estate, and I think with the universities being involved, it'll be great there'll be more viable candidates, so to speak, and get early exposure to it. So,
and presumably it'll reduce firms' training costs. When we started the master's degree in 2012, I mean, the complaint I heard from people in the industry is to get candidates with higher ordered skills, they needed to hire people from California. And I think in our case, in the property management case, these will be undergrads, but they'll be undergrads who will have done internships. They'll have a lot of exposure to some of the principles of property management as they're going through their program.
And they can find out about that on the website as well, about this new program?
That's right.
Okay, interesting. Well, that's great. Good to hear. I know we've talked with a couple of the people in the industry about lending a hand and trying to help whatever we can on doing that. But I think having more young people exposed to it early, as opposed to kind of just falling into management, actually looking at it, is this a career I want to go to? It's a great option.
I think that for a lot of students at the undergraduate level, real estate is kind of a mystery.
Yes.
Even though you're surrounded by real estate,
you're in it every day.
And yet students often will have this image of selling homes for which you don't necessarily need to have a college degree. But increasingly, the issues with managing properties does require a lot more skills.
Yes, more sophistication, more skills now, and like I said, I think it's great to have exposure early because I think as you say, a lot of people, you think real estate, they think selling homes, and there's just so much more of it than that. And various avenues of it, from management to asset management. There's so much things they can get involved in. So,
and this will get into some of the other topics I think we should discuss today, which is that being a property owner is a much more complicated business today than it was only as recently as 2 or 3 years ago. We've seen a lot of legislation at the city level and at the statewide level that have made being a property owner much more difficult. I think there's going to be a sea change of ownership where people who have been, who've stumbled into real estate holdings have learned that either they need to become much more professional and lawyer up and manage their properties to the letter of the law, or else they just ought to pull out.
I will say that it's the group that kind of becomes the accidental landlord are going to be the ones that now, the way you used to manage 10 years ago, probably not going to fly. It's going to be a different level of professionalism, different level of, kind of across the board. And I'm thinking you're going to see management companies are going to have a hiring because they're going to need to hire, because I think you're going to see people say, I don't want to do this on, I don't want to do this kind of part-time, and I need to bring in a professional, and that's going to bring hiring a management company. And at that point, because a lot of it has to do with a lot of legislation, a lot of the rules and regs that are in place now.
My wife and I moved to Portland in the early 90s from New Jersey, which is a rent-regulated state.
Right.
And I knew I had a job coming up at Portland State, and so I wanted to, find a place to live. And in New Jersey and in New York, often you have to plan these things out months in advance. And so I made a special trip in June with my wife. I wasn't really planning to move until September, and started talking to landlords to saying, hey, can we arrange for an apartment? This is kind of what we're looking for. And we were told, Jerry, you've come way too early.
Yeah, we're not prepared for this.
We're not really ready for you. We can give you floor plans and talk about units that might come open, but in this market, we had so many people who are renting month to month, which is just unheard of in the East Coast. So I think that moving forward, there will be a lot more challenges. And they're multiple. I think one of them is going to be screening issues. The state now regulates how you can screen tenants. So
the city's got their plan, which is supposed to go in effect in March, and that's depending on what actually comes out in the administrative rules on that part on the screening within the city. I think that's going to drive a lot of people to look at, do I really want to be in management? And if not, what are my options? Is it that I'm selling? Am I bringing in a management company? Because that's going to be a big change.
I mean, the way that I look at what rental markets should be is they should be a meeting of two willing customers.
Right.
One who's checked out the unit and decided whether that unit meets their needs, and a landlord who's scoped out the tenant, check the background references and determine if that's somebody that they want to rent to. But I think the regulations, as I understand them, treat it almost like a public utility, first come, first serve. And some of it, I think, is done with the best of intentions, right? This is this whole ban the box movement and a concern about people who've had, criminal histories in the past not getting a fair shake in the rental market. But I think the risk that this creates is a risk that tenants in the city are going to find themselves next to or in a complex with a problem tenant who creates problems for everybody. And if you then, on the backside, the eviction rules have become sufficiently difficult that trying to remove a tenant who's creating problems for the entire community in that complex is going to be much more difficult.
Well, I think they're trying to address an issue, but I think it's a smaller issue. But it's trying to do this broad brush and forgetting all the unintended consequences on this. What is the population you're really trying to serve, and let's look at that. And are there ways to do that? I think at the end it's going to hurt more tenants across the board. You're going to have landlords or property owners are going to be less willing to take, somebody that's maybe suspect because they're of the other regulations and they don't want to do that. So it's going to be interesting. And again, we're waiting till March, I think, is when it's supposed to go into effect. I would imagine once the administrative rules come in, there'll be some other stuff. And this is within the city, but I think it's going to change kind of the game on. And again, a lot of the smaller owners will have a lot of issues. I think the management companies are just kind of saying, hey, give us what the regulations are, and we will manage around that, but it's the ambiguity we're not sure about. That's what they can't stand. So it'll be interesting. And
this interacts with the tenant relocation policies that are now in place, where there's this bounty that's sitting out there, where if you do need to move a tenant out, and it could be for a variety of reasons. It could be that you want to upgrade the property. If I'm going to improve my common areas, I may need to have a whole wing of a building vacated. And if I don't have the flexibility to have leases expire and not be renewed, then I'm either forced into a very litigious situation with my tenants, or I'm just simply have to pay these relocation fees,
or they don't do the work, or your housing stock quality goes down, and that's a whole other.
I mean, the national data on this tells us that we spend as much on rehabilitating the existing housing stock as we do building the new housing stock, and these things can be delayed, but if they're delayed for very long periods of time, buildings will fall in quality. And I think one of the unfortunate things I think about the rent control legislation that was passed in just the past legislature was that the amount of increases that were allowed were well beyond what most landlords would ever charge.
The 7% plus CPI in the state.
In the state.
Right.
That's right.
Exactly.
That it provides very little benefit. So I don't think that the tenant activist community has at all been satisfied with that legislation. But what it does choke off is the investors who are thinking about moving a property from a C to a B level quality, or B level quality to an A level quality, the so-called value add investors. And those investors need to have a large jump in rent, maybe 30%, in order to justify those kind of upgrades to the property. Now, in the communities that have had rent control for a very long time, they often will have formulas for
resetting the rents.
Rents to accommodate major capital improvements. Some do, some don't. The ones that don't often will see, apartment quality deteriorate.
Right.
But it's, it won't be dramatic. It won't, I think the problems with rent control, unfortunately, are the kind of things where there's no impact the morning after, and so it's very hard to kind of document, except over a very long.
Well, that's what I'll say. Some of the stuff that's been passed it's more of a political solution, because you put it in. You're not rent control. You don't have to do appropriations for funds, as opposed to like expanding the voucher program. The unintended consequences, you're really not going to feel those for out there in the future. So
Right.
in the short term, I don't have to get I don't have to get appropriations. The unintended consequences aren't really effects, and it looks good
Right.
so what a great. But does it really address the policy? Doesn't really address the concern you're trying to fix, and that's. But again, we've kind of been going this with the city and the state for the last few years about what is the problem you really want to fix? Let's try to work on that together. And I just, again, I think a lot of it's just how we are in politics nowadays. There's not a lot of working together, and so.
Well, I think what it requires is for the real estate community to just be much more engaged than
Yes.
they've ever done before, and
Which will hopefully, like with this Portland State program. I mean, you're going to have more people involved in management, and because I do think there's there's not a full understanding of what a property, in our world, multifamily, what a multifamily manager does.
Right.
There's this assumption that you collect the rents, and the rents, you're making all this money, and there's not a real. And I think as more people get educated in that, more people get into the industry and see, hey, wait a minute, there is risk to this. There's added costs that people don't account for. I think that'll help in terms of trying to educate and hopefully get more active in dealing with, there's problem. We do have to do something with affordability, and how do we try to address that? So
one of the things that we're doing at our center, the Center for Real Estate, is we've developed a partnership with Multifamily Northwest,
right.
where they're funding a monthly series of white papers to talk about some of these different policies, but also just to educate the policymakers about what the real estate market is about,
Right.
and to understand. I mean, take for example the question of housing affordability. We, as a society, have never been able to offer subsidized housing for every poor person who qualifies. So it's a means-tested benefit that benefits less than 50% of the low-income households. Most low-income households find apartments at market rents. Typically, it would be a unit that's, in the language, seasoned or gone through a couple cycles. Housing tends to deteriorate and depreciate in value by about 1 or 2% per year.
Right.
So the houses that are naturally occurring and affordable are houses that were built in, let's say, the 20s or the 40s, and for whatever reason have depreciated in value. Just in the same way, I would find an affordable car on Canyon Road or McLaughlin.
The new car you buy today is the affordable car in 5 years.
That's right. And
the same thing with housing.
And so now
maybe take longer. It's not going to be 5 years, but I mean it's
an equivalent.
Right.
It's
right.
a proportionate amount of time, and I think that. So that's one of the things I'm looking forward to writing, is this understanding of what housing filtering actually means,
right.
and give people a better perspective on the way in which we can, the way in which we can provide more of that. And so the lesson learned is that we need to build a lot of the new stuff so that the older housing gets vacated and becomes available for lower income households. Because I think the way that we need to think about this as Oregonians is to recognize that we're sitting on the doorsteps of California, we're sitting on the doorsteps of a much larger state in Washington. We will receive Californians next year, the year after, and the year after, and either we accommodate their housing needs, or they're going to pick over the existing housing. And so I think that
rise the cost of everything.
That's right. So they're going to come to our market with a lot of equity and expectations to be able to have a house in the forest, or I'm not sure why they'd want a swimming pool, but maybe a swimming pool with their house. And if we don't allow for new housing to be developed, they're going to pick over the existing supply and create this kind of pressure cooker of the same amount of housing. Now we have some, we've adjusted for that. I mean, I think the folks with Smart Growth Oregon have documented how we're increasing the number of households and population, but not having a proportionate increase. The numbers I've seen is something in the order of 0.7 housing units for every household being formed. So what that implies is that a lot of people are doubling up, and they're forming non-traditional households, maybe extended households, So the market has the ability to soak up some demand, almost like water in a sponge. But at a certain point, the sponge becomes saturated.
And
And
you still have the water coming in.
And people have to will have to live in ex-urban places like Canby and Woodburn, and commute into Portland. Or firms will just simply say, the cost of housing in this market is too high. And there are other nice places in the West that you can look at. You can go to Salt Lake City, you can go to Denver, you can go to Phoenix, go to Boise. And so we will end up becoming the kind of market where there's a nice quality of life, but it's just too unaffordable for our children to want to stay here.
Well, that's what I've talked to people about density. As an example, they'll say, we don't want any additional density within the city.
Right.
And my answer, well, that's great because you're already here. I understand that, but your city's not going to grow because at some point, like you said, employers are going to go somewhere else if it gets too unaffordable. And where your kids will never have the opportunity to live within the city if you don't provide more housing. We're on the West Coast. Like you said, we're next to California, we're next to Washington. There's benefits of the climate. You're still having immigration here, and you have to bring in more housing. And around here, nobody wants urban sprawl. That's a big thing about, you and I have had many discussions about, the lack of expansion of the urban growth boundary. Well, if you're not going to expand the urban growth boundary sufficiently enough for this demand, you don't want added density, you can't have affordability. There's no way around it. And so
I think the intellectually honest position to take is simply to be in favor of housing in all sorts of places.
Yes.
And so I think the one thing the legislature did, there's some issues with it, but I think the one thing the legislature did that was pro-housing was allowing for more duplexes and triplexes within our existing neighborhoods. And
that was a start.
We'll see how that implements, but I think what I would keep in mind is that that's providing houses at onesies and twosies, and really what we need are dozens. Right. And unfortunately, I think our multifamily market is really challenged right now with inclusionary zoning regulations.
Very much so.
I think they're particularly biting for the inner core. Maybe not so in the outer parts of Portland where market rents are a lot lower. And I think developers are now, because of some of the regulations in Portland, they're starting to look at places like Beaverton and Hillsborough, where the rents are rising, and if they reach a certain point, I was talking to a developer in Beaverton who's saying that he was seeing $2.06 per square foot rents in downtown Beaverton, or $2.10. That's starting to get into the range where doing the 4/1 construction that you've been seeing in Division and
starts making some sense.
That's right. They start penciling.
But it's not like that in every submarket. So it's hard to deliver that kind of product in other submarkets until we get that rent level.
And if that becomes our marginal supply, that just means that rents have to reach that level, right, broadly speaking, across the metro area. So I'm in favor of more of our urban reserves being brought in. Yes. Metro in 2018, I think, did the right thing in expanding the urban growth boundary in 4 places: Hillsborough, Beaverton, King City, and Wilsonville.
Right.
And I think those sites are developable. They'll need some help. I wish Metro in their upcoming transportation bond would help make some of those places easier to develop. I think the infrastructure that would make those places better connected to the job markets
would be a way to kind of spur the development there.
Would make that development happen faster.
Right.
But if you take a look at the plans that the cities came up with in those 4 locations, they basically represent 1 year's worth of development, 1 year's worth of housing development in our 4-county region. And for that reason, I think that Metro ought to be doing these expansions on an annual basis, right, as requested by the towns. So I think it's a challenge. I think if they add the infrastructure spending that makes those developments happen, they will have those urban reserves live up to their fruition. Unlike, for example, the big expansion that happened in Damascus in the 90s, where it was unserved by existing infrastructure and just laid fallow.
Exactly.
And to complete that story, what happened was, of course, the city of Damascus was disbanded. The city of Happy, so it's now mostly unincorporated. The city of Happy Valley has been picking over little bits on the edges, which were relatively easy to serve.
This is 20 years going on. This is
yeah. So we'll see. I mean, I think one of the big debates that'll be happening in the next 18 months is going to be this transportation bond measure.
Right. That's coming up November of 2020.
November 2020.
Right.
It was part of Metro Council President Lynn Peterson's campaign. She talked about spending $20 billion for 20 corridors built over 20 years, the 2020 plan. That's been trimmed a little bit, and I think it's incumbent, I think, upon the industry to look over those lists of Tier 1 and Tier 2 projects to identify the ones that would be of the greatest value from a housing production point of view. I think or from an economic development point of view. I think the ones that are, I think, most attractive right now are two on the west side. They're going to upgrade Tualatin Valley Highway, TV Highway, and they're going to upgrade 185th.
All right.
And then on the east side, there's two projects which ultimately connect to each other in Damascus. There's a Highway 212 extension, as well as a so-called C2C, Columbia to Clackamas project that would run north-south, connecting 84 to ultimately to the Damascus area and Highway 212. And I think if those two projects if those four projects were approved, that would be very helpful. But right now, there's nothing connecting any of these urban reserves outside of the TV Highway project and South Hillsborough. I think there's none of these projects are connecting to the urban reserves, and the main reason for that is because the T2020, the November 2020 bond measure, is intended to pay for the Southwest Corridor light rail to Bridgeport Village. That's a $3 billion project.
It's a big ask.
And of that, 800 million is being requested. And to me, I think we ought to walk away from that project. Light rail serves a very small number of people. Some of these other roads are going to be much more better utilized and less bus service, frankly, express bus service could be delivered
better utilized. I think
project.
I think it'd be a better way to go. But again, I think they've proven they really like to do the light rail, even though how much employment is that serving down that corridor? So,
well, very little, and basically what the challenge is that it's a political problem. TriMet has not had a successful light rail bond measure since the South North project failed almost 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, and so they've learned to use other mechanisms. But this is going to be front and center since it's such a large part of this overall bond package. But they know that voters won't approve. They know that voters at a metropolitan level, at a 3-county level, will not approve one line. So they have to have other packages to
try to
provide fig leaf.
To try to get approval for it. Right.
And so what that means is that from the point of view of the political officials at Metro, since Southwest is getting this $800 million investment, they're not going to get anything else. And so they're looking at projects to balance that out. I think one way to frame it that might be more productive would be to say, would the voters in Tigard and Wilsonville and Lake Oswego and King City, who are getting nothing, and Beaverton, who are getting nothing out of the existing package, would they like to swap the $800 million for improvement of roads elsewhere?
Exactly. Right.
Almost kind of the reverse of the Mount Hood Freeway discussion, where the Mount Hood Freeway was canceled in favor of light rail along Interstate 84. Could we cancel the Southwest Corridor project in favor of, say, a highway or a road really from Hillsborough to Sherwood, or from Sherwood to Wilsonville? I think those would be very useful connections to make kind of emerging commuting patterns and helping both to...
Well, like you said, it's political though. Once it becomes political, then a lot of the, I don't want to say common sense, but a lot of the true benefit that you're doing it for, you kind of lose some of that, which is interesting.
Well, we have elections every 2 years in our state, and I think that there are a number of important races for the real estate industry to get involved in. I sit on the Public Affairs Committee and co-chair the Public Affairs Committee for NAIOP. We're a relatively small player. We tend to focus on local races, but I think that there are some important races that need to be considered. And I think that the sweet spot, I think, for the industry is to look for progressive candidates, typically Democrats, who are interested in economic development.
Right.
And part of that, for our community is going to be looking after the real estate industry and trying to come up with a better functioning real estate market. Which
I think with what's happened in the last few years in Portland and the state, I think you're going to see more involvement, my hope is, more active involvement from the industry and trying to, and just instead of waiting for something to come down and then trying to react to it, actually try to get a foot in the door, part of the discussion in terms of, what's the best thing that's going to serve the community and the state. So hopefully that's kind of the end product of what's happened the last few years, and we'll get more involvement within the industry in trying to shape some of these policies. Because at the end of the day, we all want a economic viable community, and we've all got to work on that to try to bring that to fruition. So
yeah, I think the last legislature kind of hangs its hat on the improvements that they made to education in our state. They got the business community involved, and they
right.
negotiated over what that package would be. But really, they've been I think the things that they've been doing for the last two legislatures have been unwittingly anti-housing.
Yes.
And I think that needs to change.
Yeah. So, well, thank you for the update.
Yeah.
We'll see you next time on HFO-TV, and I'm sure we'll bring you back and talk again a little bit about the changes. Thanks
Great.
again. All right, we'll see you next time on HFO-TV.
Our entire office specializes in multifamily real estate, making HFO the largest multifamily brokerage in the Pacific Northwest. Your success is our passion. Build your legacy with HFO. Call 503-241-5541 or visit our website at hfore.com for more information.